Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with our mini-series on whether or not an eternal life is desirable, looking at would the afterlife suck? Now, one of the prime selling points of many religions is the idea of an immortal soul that lives on after death. Most everyone is afraid of death, so being able to promise that death is just an illusion is a tantalizing proposition. However, forever is a long time, and even eternity in the best conditions might be more of a punishment than a reward, as we saw in the previous video on Bernard Williams's argument against an eternal life. Check out that video if you're curious for the argument. Is an eternal afterlife really something that you want? This video will not focus on any one particular view of the afterlife, just generally the claim that your soul is eternal, whether living on through reincarnation, heaven, or something else. Now, in our last video, we looked at Bernard Williams's argument that even the best possible eternal life is undesirable compared to death because you will be stuck with an eternity of boredom after doing everything there is to do. In this video, we'll take a look at the impacts of this conclusion on religion, and in the next video in this mini-series, we'll focus on some objections to Williams's conclusions, as well as the implications of those objections for some of these kind of knock-on effects to religion. But for this one, we're just going to assume that Williams's argument is true and see how that would impact the case for an eternal soul or the case for an afterlife. Now, the argument might go something like this. So God or gods created humans with immortal souls that live on for eternity. Premise 2, living on for eternity, even the best of circumstances, is worse than dying after you complete all of your unconditional goals. Because either you will change so much that you become a different person, and therefore you lose your identity, or you will become bored because you will have no unconditional goals to fulfill. God or gods did not therefore create the best of all possible worlds, because there's a better one where souls are not immortal, specifically where souls fulfill all of their unconditional goals before they die. Therefore, God is either impotent, unable to create such a world where an immortal soul doesn't exist, dumb, not knowledgeable enough to realize that such a world is the best of all possible worlds, or evil, plenty happy for humans to suffer. Now, as with the problem of evil, there are some easy answers to this argument, and there's a lot of comparisons between this argument and the problem of evil, but there are some important differences. This argument doesn't have the issues of the free will defense that the problem of evil does. However, it does have some of the issues with Bernard Williams' initial argument. If you don't accept that, you may not accept the conclusions here. So a religion that views their god or gods as not all-powerful, all-knowing, or all-good could easily explain this. An evil god might be happy to see us suffer for an eternity. An impotent god might not be able to kill a soul, or an unintelligent god might not realize that living forever is a bad thing. Similarly, religions that think souls can die, perhaps in the afterlife after completing their goals, are therefore not immortal, are equally immune. And different versions of the afterlife will face different issues of this. So if you have a version of reincarnation, you're going to have more of the identity problem of, yes, you will have new unconditional goals with every life, but you will lose your identity and what makes you that individual because you will change so much. Whereas religions that have kind of the static state afterlife have more of the other problem of getting bored because you will eventually run out of unconditional goals to fulfill. However, for some religions that have this kind of deity, an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good deity, and the view that the soul is eternal, which are central to their worldview, have a challenge with this argument because those ideas can't be easily discarded. If you're holding on to those ideas of an eternal soul and a 3-0 God, this argument is a problem for you. So, religions that believe in a 3-0 omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent God and an eternal soul face a substantial challenge here. This challenge is in many ways more substantial than the problem of evil, because while theists can tell stories of why evil in the world exists and was caused by something other than a deity, whether that's human evil through free will, etc., eternal souls are directly and explicitly associated with God. That the Creator endows individuals with a soul and after death allows them to live forever in the kingdom of heaven, for example, is something that is explicitly done by God. If that system is bad and causes problems, that must mean that that God is bad or evil or unable to change the system. This system is explicitly constructed by God in many traditions, and therefore these traditions face a grave issue if eternal life is actually a bad thing. The famous free will defense is insufficient, since there is no other good that requires an infinite life. The free will defense famously argues that free will is a great enough good that having evil caused by humans in the world is acceptable because free will is more important than it, and the argument that you'll have an eternity of good in the afterlife. If in fact an eternal life is a bad thing, the free will defense certainly doesn't work, and if anything, it weakens the free will defense against the problem of evil because you don't have that reward of an eternally good afterlife because such a thing is inherently impossible. God is not logically precluded from having made life just end. Beyond changing concepts central to their dogma, I do think that the best course of action for the theist is to take object with Williams's initial argument. Because if you accept Williams's conclusion, there is a significant issue with the idea of an afterlife created by an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good God. However, there are some points of entry you might have at Williams' initial argument. Because if his conclusion about the afterlife, that the afterlife would be eternal torture, is correct, there seems to be no good recourse for religions like this. What do you think? Is this a sufficient argument against such religions? If you accept Williams's view, do you think it's a sufficient argument? If you are a theist, do you think that you can accept Williams's argument and still maintain your kind of theism? If you're not a theist, do you think this argument is sufficient to get rid of that theism, or are you skeptical that it's not sufficient? In the last video in the mini-series, we're going to go ahead and cover objections to Williams's argument and how the impacts of the power of this argument against theists. So we're going to look at some of the objections. So as we concluded in this video, a lot of the ways that you can poke at this are not in this half of the argument. They're in the half of the argument that accepts that eternal life is a bad thing. And so you need to poke and prod at that portion of the argument, not this one. And how some of those might change the impact, but not necessarily completely get rid of it in terms of the argument, this later argument against theists. So subscribe if you're interested in content like this. Hit that notification bell if you want to be notified whenever we put out a video like this. Stay tuned for the next video in this series where we'll cover objections to Williams's argument and the impact of those arguments on the theists. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org and stay skeptical, everybody.